You are listening to the Lawyer Stories podcast with host Benny Gold. Lawyer Stories was founded in July 2017 and is an expanding global network of lawyers and law students sharing their personal journeys to the noble profession of the practice of law. Join us on this podcast as we dig deeper into these stories and hear from lawyers and law students from around the world in all areas of the legal profession. Here at Lawyer Stories, we believe that every lawyer has a story. What's yours?
Welcome to the Lawyer Stories podcast with Benny Gold. Today we welcome in Jeffrey Possinger, managing member of the Possinger Law Group, located in Woodinville, Washington, practicing in the area of business law, tech law, estate planning, and as a general outside counsel to various business. Mr. Possinger was also a lawyer on the litigation of the well-known Miska the Cat case, which got picked up by several news outlets and stations there out west. Very interesting. And we're going to discuss that in a little bit. How are you? Thanks for being here.
I'm doing great, Benny. Thanks for inviting me to be part of your show.
Yeah, for sure. It's really nice to have you on. And I just first off, before we get into everything, I just want to thank you for being such a a supporter of Lawyer Stories. It doesn't go unnoticed, and it really means a lot to me because we've been working really hard at building something really special, and I know you've been there as a supporter, and so thank you so much.
You're welcome. Lawyer Story is a great website. It's a great resource for people to just get to know other lawyers, and I've really enjoyed being any kind of help I can be.
Great, and we're happy to connect you to anybody we might know. That's sort of what we do, and that's what the heart of what I actually love doing. But thank you so much. So you're in Washington State. I don't know. I think I did say that. I said you're in Woodinville, Washington. So
right.
Are you born and raised in out west?
I am. I actually am from Washington. I'm kind of one of those rare people that's actually a born and raised Washingtonian who's also a Gen Xer. But
Okay.
Woodinville's on the east side. People know Seattle, but there's an area that we refer to as the east side on the other side of Lake Washington, and that's where we are.
Okay. So so you were in Washington, you were Washingtonian. What town? Were you Bellevue? I know that's like close, or I was looking at a map earlier, brushing up on my geography.
Washington geography. I was actually born on the Olympic Peninsula, not far from Forks, where people know the Twilight series got filmed.
Okay.
My family didn't stay there very long. We actually moved to Kirkland back when I was a kid, probably 18 months old, 2 years old, and I grew up in Kirkland.
Okay, very good. So when was the moment? Like, did you have a moment when you said, I'm going to go to law school, I'm going to be a lawyer, this is what I'm going to do?
It's funny you say that because yes and no. When I was growing up, it was almost used as an epithet by my family that you should be a lawyer. And so people would say it all the time, you should be a lawyer, you should be a lawyer. And usually they didn't say it in a very positive way necessarily. And so
you were fighting with somebody and they were like,
yeah, or
fighting for somebody.
Yeah, there was always an advocacy part. I think I've always had a sense of not necessarily justice. People talk a lot about having a sense of justice as much as I had a sense of injustice. If I saw something that didn't seem right, I always felt a need to set things right at a certain level. But I actually didn't do a lot of thinking about being a lawyer until much later. My undergrad wasn't really in law originally, and it was only later that when I decided to be a lawyer, and I told the family over a holiday dinner that I had decided to go to law school, a few people at the table basically responded instinctively with, well, it's about time.
Yeah, there you go. What were you doing before, like in college?
Well, my undergraduate degree was actually German lit and language. And I was it's very nerdy. I studied medieval German literature. And
no, but you know what? That stuff is dense, right? I mean, I don't even know. I've probably never read like a page of it, but I know like some of this, like the European history and all that, like this literature can be really dense. So I don't think that's too far off from, read a lot of the reading that you have to do in law school.
No, it's really not. And the thing about it is is that reading is reading, analysis is analysis. Getting inside the head of an author, just like you're getting inside the head of a judge or an opposing counsel, those are skills that are transferable to just about anything.
Wow, that's really interesting. Getting inside the head. That's, I've heard a lot on this show, and that's really like the first time that I've heard like somebody say that, getting inside the head of opposing. Do you have to know like a judge, like in his proclivities for a while for you to be able to do that sort of thing?
I don't know. I think I try to always educate myself on who I'm talking to,
Okay, smart.
whether it's a judge, opposing counsel, or even getting a sense of who the parties are. I think a little of that comes from the fact that in addition to being a lawyer, I've also worked as a mediator. And so you learn to understand what the other side's thinking, try to get behind their eyeballs a little bit, and what are they thinking, and that. And I think it's played out in my practice in the way I approach a lot of different things.
Oh, that's awesome. So you do complex litigation, right? I was reading up a little bit. Now, maybe this is sort of a layup question, but like, can you just describe what complex litigation is? Is it just like taking on more than one issue, or what makes something a complex litigation?
Oh, it can be a lot of different things. It can be things that relate to, for example, multiple parties. If you got different parties in different roles, third party. This is like first year.
Okay. All right.
Pro.
Yeah.
Practice. You've got people who are intervening.
Okay.
Have different kinds of claims. That can be part of it.
Okay.
The other part can be complex issues where there's injunctive relief along with other kinds of legal claims and cross claims and sorting all that stuff out.
I didn't know if there was like one specific thing that like brought it over into the rose to the occasion of a complex sort of litigation. I really wanted to ask you about that. No.
Yeah, I don't know. I mean, I think it all depends on, it's like paralegal. What's a paralegal? Ask 20 different attorneys and you're going to get 21 or 22 different answers.
Right, right. So you have great experience. I mean, you've been doing this for like about 22 years. You've had a firm, you have a lot of a wealth of experience and knowledge to share. What has changed about the profession in 20? Yeah, and I don't mean to put you on the spot about that, but I'm really curious, like if you've seen anything sort of change since you started out.
Yeah, I think there's a lot that's changed. I mean, the pandemic has brought a lot of this stuff out. I'm a little old school. I like doing depositions the old-fashioned way in person because I like to read people and get a sense of them, in person.
That's fair.
So a lot of technology has created a lot of changes in the way people practice. So there's that. And I think there's a lot of expectations that have changed of what people want out of a law practice. And so I think there's been a lot of changes that way of the people who've come into law school and now are first through fifth year associates are coming through the law schools, 20 something years later than me with really different ideas about what the practice of law is even about.
Really? How so?
Yeah, I think there's been a definite shift away from, for example, I'll give you by example, I think. I had a professor who's passed away now who is famous for writing law exam questions in his class in such a way that the most sympathetic character in the fact pattern was usually the one for whom the law should be ruled against. And the person who was the nastiest character in his fact pattern actually had the law on their side.
Okay.
And I find that a lot of times in my experience is that there's a lot of passionate young lawyers who are more about, they're driven a lot of times by passion as opposed to analysis. And so I've seen that a lot lately.
Interesting.
But again, I think that's just a flavor of the times we're living in.
Oh, that's interesting. How did you, being an old school lawyer, I love that too, because like when I was in law school, even though like you were in the library late at night, it was sort of like being in the stacks. You know what I mean? There's something like really traditional about being in those aisles with all the books. I think I was like the last class before they actually like let people just do things online like every time. I mean, we had to do something in the books and then we could go online like the second semester. But I think after that, it was all online. But there was something like traditional about, being in the books and like finding the stacks and the law and the inserts. How did COVID affect your practice? Like, were you guys working from home or like, was that a big issue for you?
Oh yeah, COVID was huge. We had just moved to this brand new office that we are in today, about 4 months before COVID hit. And so we invested a lot in getting this place going, getting everything set up. COVID hit, and for at least 6 months, we were doing hybrid work. I would come into this office building essentially alone. I felt like I was out of a Twilight Zone episode where the last man in the world. So I was the only guy coming into the office, into an empty office complex.
Right.
And so we figured a workaround. We figured out how to be resilient, like a lot of other people did, and adapt. And I think surviving in any kind of business, including the business of being a law firm, is about adaptation and, taking the skills you've got, but also not being so rigid that you can't adjust when the times change.
Wow. Okay. Yeah, it was definitely an interesting time. I think a lot of people changed their sort of mindset during COVID, and pushed employers to the limit about what they can do and how flexible they can be. So
Right.
I think it was definitely an interesting period of time.
And I think one of the things too that happened, I think all of us have seen this in practice, is the way that bar associations, I don't know if this is a trend that I can put a statistic to, but this is more anecdotal, is that because of COVID and because of remote work, it seems like a lot of bar associations have gotten a little lax, or at least are turning a blind eye to what used to be called multi-jurisdictional practice, in the sense that people will be like on a beach in Florida working on something, even if they're an Idaho lawyer or whatever. And I know that certain RPCs of different states have a different view of those things. So
that's interesting.
It's kind of interesting times we live in.
So that's interesting. Like I think waving in, like about 12 years ago, just became a thing. I waved into a couple states, and but I hadn't thought of it like that. I thought where you were going to go with, these people in Florida are trying to get their motions granted, wearing shorts and t-shirts, or laying in bed.
That happens.
You
too.
see all the news, right?
I didn't get that. Like last week, I was in a bunch of depositions, and I'm dressed down right now by Jeffrey standards, and opposing counsel, who was wearing a polo shirt to the deposition, informed me we weren't in court. And I thought, well, I guess I'm an old school lawyer, and when I represent a client who's paying me to represent them, I figure I should step into the role that they expect me to be, and be there to represent them in their best interests. And I think how you present yourself is part of that.
I love that. I think that's 100%. Did you have a mentor?
I did. I've had a couple different mentors that I've been really grateful for. One was a family lawyer who had been a family lawyer of my family for years. And so when I first couple years of practice, I got a lot of advice from him. And then I'd had a couple other attorneys that I had basically on speed dial the first 5-6 years of practice. I've continued to have a relationship with them, even though it's changed over time. And interestingly enough, and this is, at some point, if you ever ask me a little bit of advice that I might give to future lawyers at some point, is that I actually had a mentor who was a senior paralegal who'd been in practice like 20 or 30 years. And more than once in the early days of my practice, I would call her up in a panic. Do you have this form? Do you have that form?
Yeah.
And how do you do this kind of motion? And the paralegal community that support lawyers sometimes are a huge treasure trove of knowledge that you could and should tap into.
Oh yeah, for sure. Do you want to state your advice for, let me rephrase that. Jeffrey, do you have some advice for young lawyers?
Yeah, I have a couple of bits. One is figure out what you're good at and then manage around everything else. Don't try to be an expert at everything. You'll burn yourself out. So, figure out what you're good at, find people to support you in the areas that you're not good at. In your practice, build systems to support you. Don't try to do it all yourself. And one thing that I've been learning a lot about lately for myself, because it's been a part of my practice the last year or so, is really don't neglect your health. Take care of your health, treat yourself like an athlete, so to speak. Eat right, sleep right, make sure you work out. As much as that seems kind of like trite advice, I've come to find that taking good care of yourself helps you perform day in, day out with the high stress that you have as a lawyer.
It's great advice. I think you really have to feel good about yourself in order to project that onto your work and to other people. So thank you for that. So Jeffrey, let's talk about the Miska the Cat case. That was kind of interesting. I read a little bit about it. After years of litigation, you got a settlement for the client. How did you get that case? You joined. What happened?
Well, it's funny, since today is like Rosh Hashanah. Part of it is I was introduced at a dinner that I was at to a guy by the name of John Zimmerman. He was my colleague on that case. And we were introduced because he had this case that was going on already. He was a lawyer who practiced primarily infraction law, and that's how he'd originally got this, because it was about civil infractions. Okay. And as we talked about it, the common friend said, "Hey, you should meet this guy, Jeffrey. I think he's got a crazy story about this cat. You'd love to hear about it." And so that evening we ended up talking about it. And over the course of the next few weeks, because of that conversation, he would call me up with issues, again, back to this complex litigation issue, because as he was exploring the case, he realized, I think this is a lot bigger than an infraction issue, the more I dig. And he was right. There was a lot more going on in that case. And so we started talking about injunctive relief, declaratory relief, how to go about, approaching complex matter.
So let's back up. Before we talk about the legality, let's give a little bit of the facts so people know how, I don't want to say crazy, but how kind of cool, this is an interesting sort of fact pattern. This is a government that's like a local government that's seeing a cat that has multiple complaints, up to 30 complaints, right, about the cat roaming and bothering other people in the neighborhood. Is that right?
Neighborhood animals. Those were the allegations that were leveled against Miska. The Miska the Cat case is interesting because even though it's about a cat, it was really about government overreach, and the reason for that was
that's awesome. That's so interesting, and I think that's I don't know. That's just a great point. To bring it out in a case like Miska the Cat.
Well, the thing about it that made it interesting is that when the case started, our client Anna Daniele kept getting citation after citation after citation, just piled on, almost $30,000 worth of citations against her cat. And of course, it's this is really over the top. Well, what later became revealed in discovery and through other work we were doing, which is why this case began to explode, is that it turned out one of the complainants was the head of animal control who lived in her neighborhood.
Right.
And so part of the reason why the county, and people need to know that King County is one of the 18th biggest jurisdictions in the United States. It's a very large county, and it's the biggest in the state of Washington. And the city of Bellevue, which is where the city was in King County, is one of the bigger cities in Washington as well. So we were up against some of the biggest government jurisdictions in the state of Washington when we took this case on. But what we discovered is that this county animal control agency was under the direction and control of our client's neighbor. And the client's neighbor had an interest in the outcome of this, which is part of the reason why so much intense prosecution was going on with our client.
Okay. And I think that's a huge key, the neighbor of the cat, right? Of Daniele?
Yeah, Daniele.
Daniele was, and she was also government. So that was that. Yeah. Okay. So she had an interest in, using her persuasion as a government agent to really do something about the cat.
Right. And our client, who was a Polish immigrant who had lived through multiple tyrannical regimes, had a certain amount of resilience of okay, I've put up with oppressive governments before, and I'm standing up to this one, and I'm not going to back down. And so as attorneys, John and I litigated hard, and we ultimately got a settlement. We went
and you literally changed the code, right?
This was the perfect storm. When you ask about complex cases, there was this tort element going on, with these wrongful acts. And at the same time, one of the things that was going on is we discovered that the code in question, the Bellevue Municipal Code, had an error in it, which made the system they were using unenforceable. And we realized that the law hadn't been effective for almost 5 years. And so even though they had this hearing examiner system, a kind of judge, quasi-judicial function, it wasn't actually authorized. And so part of what we obtained in court was an injunction and declaratory relief that Bellevue's code was invalid. And as a result, the judge ordered them to stop prosecuting cases until they updated their code. They did that within about a month.
Wow. How do they get that done within a month? That is insane.
They have a process. I mean, like any code that is changed. I used to be a city council member as well at one point in my career. And so and knowing that actually was part of the reason we were able to so effectively argue to the judge how legislative acts work. But basically what they had to do is get a resolution for a code revision in front of the city council. I think in Bellevue, they have 1 or 2 readings, and they just had to change a couple bits of language in the code ultimately. And they did. They got it done within a couple council meetings. They made a revision, and then the code went effective within a couple weeks, I think, after that. So it took about, I think, 6 weeks.
Wow.
From the time the order was entered to the time that they got the code updated and were back in business. But we were able to effectively get that changed. And the fun part was there were a number of other cities around the Puget Sound region in King County that had the same problem with their code. And when they heard about what we had done with the city of Bellevue, they all changed their code too.
Really? They didn't have issues. They weren't citing you, but they just changed their code.
Yeah, well, they realized that I think we got enough attention in the municipal law arena in King County.
Okay.
The city attorneys at all these different cities decided to go open up the code books for that part of the code. And a bunch of them realized they had the same problem in their code that Bellevue did. And so preemptively they fixed them.
Does that give you an itch to do like more like municipal law, like government work, that sort of thing? Like again, like sort of standing up to the government for people, or not really?
We've done that before. I mean, I don't know that that's what I do for a living, but it's something I'm not afraid of doing.
What kind of what kind of things was Miska doing? Like she was just like roaming free and like
being a cat.
Okay. I'm a dog person.
Being a cat, honestly, the things that she was accused of doing was being a cat. And then, one of the neighbors really had it, other than the animal control head, also had it in for her. And she was at one point describing our client's cat as being a cheetah. And I'm not kidding. She was describing her as being a cheetah. And the cat weighed 12 pounds.
Oh my word.
So there was.
Yeah, I saw a picture of the cat. I think it was going like this. I don't think it was really.
Yeah, and here's really what happened. I mean, at a level that everybody can understand. There's neighborhood disputes that break out all the time. Anyone who lives in a neighborhood, has, neighborhood disputes. Different people disagree about what's going on in the neighborhood, and one side, there's sometimes factions that form a little bit around that. One side of the neighborhood takes one side, and the other side takes another side. That happens. That's pretty normal. But what isn't normal is when one side gets the government to weigh in with its resources to take sides.
Right.
And that's a very different scenario.
Right.
But it's a story that I think everybody can recognize. And that was the interesting thing that John and I discovered in the course of the couple of years of litigating it, is people from all across different political stripes, different parts of the country, different views on lots of different things, could still get on board with the idea that, hey, this is a person who wants to be left alone, and they just want to be left alone, and the cat's being a cat. And we were just surprised at the kind of support we got from places we really didn't expect it, but we did. It was a fun case. I mean, it was a unique case, but it was a fun case.
And I think there's so much you could learn from it. You can give us some pointers, but I think like local government really does And I say this as, my full-time job. I'm an executive director of like 4 public housing authorities. Love my job. It's very important, but local government, they need to be watched. Like, I think like you need to really, like something like that where the person next door to the cat has like an interest in getting rid of the cat. I mean, nobody would know that unless you really like dug into it and did the research. So,
Right.
I think you really did like a good deed, obviously, for the community.
Right. And it's funny you say that about keeping the government in check, is that a lot of times, this typically happens in the criminal setting. I don't do criminal law, but I have some friends of mine that, went down that path. And one of the things that I asked a good friend of mine years ago, because I just kind of knew his political sensibilities and things like that, I said, what is it about you that makes you want to be a criminal defense attorney? I mean, don't you ever feel uncomfortable with the fact that sometimes the people that you're representing probably did it?
Yeah.
And his response was really, really wise. And he said, it's not about that particular defendant. It's about all of us. And why it's about all of us is that our job as a criminal defense attorney is to make sure that the prosecutors do their job every time, because the government, as a government, vis-a-vis any individual, has, relatively speaking, unlimited resources.
Right.
Unlimited resources. And so never allowing the prosecutorial arm of the government to get lazy, like, well, everybody knows they're guilty, so let's just move right through trial and just get to the conviction. He said, it's our job as criminal defense attorneys to make them make their case every time. And I think there's a civil component to that, where in this case, you've got a civil case where it may not be a criminal matter. There was an infraction element, but in the sense that we were holding the government to be accountable. And it took a lot of work, because I'm going to tell you, they fought hard. And
yeah,
if there's anything that I learned, because at one point we were in federal court over this, if it gives you any sense of how crazy this case got, is it got taken to federal court by King County, and then they realized, well, maybe we overstepped something, and they remanded their own case back to state.
Wow. Okay.
But one of the things that you learn in all of that is that you have to dig really, really deep, because on cases like that just drag out with, agency after agency that have their own sets of attorneys that are hammering you with one motion after the other, you really have to find a way to dig deep to just stick it out, even when you're facing really, really tough headwinds, and not giving up. That's one of the things you just learn when you're taking on a case that big.
Yeah, that's crazy.
Is just not giving up, no matter how bleak it sometimes feels.
Wow. Yeah, and I mean, this was like a pretty big case, like in your area. I mean, you were picked up by the Seattle Times, Fox.
Yeah, we did, and we actually got picked up by some European papers. And a friend of mine who lives in Colombia sent me a snapshot of it had made the paper in Colombia.
Yeah, that's awesome. Well, congratulations on that settlement. That's terrific. So, like, where do you go from here? Like, are you going to get any other, like, I don't want to say fun, but like any other, sort of entertaining but difficult cases for the people, or what?
Yeah, I mean, I will tell you that the notoriety did get a lot of phone calls for lots of different things.
Okay.
So just because, as you see the little disclaimers that often happen on the bottom of lawyers' websites that say something to the effect of, the results in this case are not assured.
Right.
All those.
Well, I'm sure you got a lot of like.
We got a lot.
Like, hey, my dog attacked this person next door. Can you defend my dog? Like. You
get a lot, but honestly, we were getting a lot of those calls before this case. You always get those kinds of calls. It just, the volume increased a little bit. But we have done complex, hard cases for a long time.
Yeah.
So it's had a little bit of notoriety, and it's something fun to talk about at dinner parties from time to time. When, in fact, actually, it was funny. My mom I was on the phone with my mom just a couple weeks ago, and she was telling me a story of like some neighbor. She lives other side of the state, so she lives quite a ways away, and she was talking to this guy, and they mentioned, that she mentioned, oh, my son's an attorney and he lives in Woodinville, and he was involved in a kind of a case that was a little famous about a cat, and the guy finished her sentence and said, "Oh, you mean Mishka?"
That's awesome, man.
So
Yeah, you
it's
got to
kind of
ride
fun.
that.
It's fun to talk about it, but as soon as the case was over, we got things taken care of for our client, and then we were back to business on our other cases and our other clients.
Yeah, no, that's awesome. You got to ride that though. You can
Yeah.
you can even brand that a little bit for yourself. With the cat.
Well, at one point during the litigation, because it was really serious. I mean, the case was the type of case that was easy to do puns with, and John.
Right, I saw some of them. I didn't write them down. I did see some of the.
Right, and
like
John,
you got like
John,
a perfect result or something.
Perfect result, and it catapulted us into the limelight. And I think at one point he talked about the equal protection clause.
Oh no!
And John is a wickedly funny guy, and he's a lot of fun to work with. He and I have very different personalities, but that's part of what made us as a team really a unique team, because his background was essentially criminal defense, being an infraction lawyer, and I'm more of a plaintiff's lawyer. So when we would approach problems, we were looking at it from very, very different angles all the time, and that tension between two different viewpoints, I think, gave us a lot better results, because we're always challenging each other's ideas. So that was really good. And but the puns got so bad, and I was a little bit more, I don't know what the word would be, I was more nervous about saying things in the press that would come back to bite us. So I would try to be much more scripted. This is what we're going to talk about when we talk to the press. He was a little more wanting to make jokes, just because it's his personality, and he's a great showman. He's got a talent that I don't have for those things. But we began to have a pun jar. So anytime we made a pun while we were talking about the case, we had to put money in a jar to stop using puns, because my fear is we would be in court and a pun would slip out unintentionally, and then it would somehow undermine our own case.
Well, Your Honor, since we're at the tail end of the case.
Right, just like that. Yeah. And so we have lots of little stories of things like that happened. And honestly, the judges pick up on this stuff too, and they're trying to take and handle the case in a serious way.
Right.
And I would say to people, when they'd say, this is crazy, it's about a cat. And I'd say, well, it's absurd, but it's not funny, because the facts are in fact absurd. They're laughable, like the context. But when you strip off that layer of what's really actually going on here, it's actually really serious what's going on.
Right.
And so we found ways to articulate that to people so they understood where our client was coming from. And I think we did a good job of being able to tell her story of what was really going on with her from her perspective.
I think it's like a great law school case, actually, to teach people government law, or even I don't know about con law, but it could be sort of a great, because the facts are really sort of engaging, and I think it's a very interesting case. Especially a lot of people are interested in government and the overreach, and how you really got to watch government agents and what they're doing, and that's super interesting.
Yeah, and it's part of actually, I think part of the role we have as lawyers, among others, is we are both officers of the court as well as watchdogs of the system. And we're called at a certain level in our profession to step up to that role and both preserve the system and also keep it in line, keep it in check.
Yeah, totally. Love that.
Yeah.
So 2 decades in practice. What keeps you motivated?
What keeps me motivated? Honestly, just my clients. And I love what I do. It's fun. Some days I just have to pinch myself and say, do I actually get to do this for a living?
That's amazing.
Yeah, it's fun. And there's days, I'm not going to say that aren't days that I'm tired. I had a week last week of 2 weeks pretty much straight of depositions the whole time. Yep. And they weren't easy ones. And yet at the same time, I just feel really blessed to get to do this job.
Jeffrey, give us some advice for owning your own law firm.
Oh, I wish that somebody had introduced to me like the book, The E-Myth, and books like that early on in my practice, to build, systems. I was blessed enough to have a colleague of mine about 5 or 6 years ago. I'd at this point been in practice about 14 or 15 years ish. And I was talking about how she had rapidly grown her firm. And so we ended up sitting down and talking about some of the things she used to systematize. I mentioned that a little bit earlier about build systems to support you.
Mhm.
And she and I had a meeting. Originally it was like, how do you manage your paralegals better? And she said, I'll do you one better. Let's have a conversation. And we ended up talking for about 2 or 3 hours about what she had done over for her at that point, a few years to build her practice. And I just took her advice and then began to use her a little bit as a mentor that I would check in with on things related to putting systems into place so that I would have more time and energy to focus on, delivering service to my clients, and then not doing all the admin stuff and delegating that
Yeah,
to other people. It
it's
makes a big
important.
difference.
Yeah, that's so important.
Yeah. And they don't teach you that in law school. And
No.
I have to say, one of my colleagues that I went to law school with, he's an adjunct professor now at Seattle University, and he teaches law firm management. And so I think it's a 1 or 2 credit class, but it's always full, from what he tells me, with law students that are really interested in not going the big corporate route, but they're thinking about doing their own, putting up their own shingle, and wanting to have the skill sets to be successful.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like a great class too.
Yeah.
So what are you most proud of in your practice?
I gotta say, I don't know that it's pride as much as it's gratitude. And even though I said that a minute ago, is that I think the thing that I'm most grateful for is that I get to do this job, that I get to serve people, make a positive impact. I get to do this stuff. The people talk about, you want to be a lawyer, and sometimes being a lawyer is kind of boring, honestly. It's like watching paint dry, when you're doing certain kinds of research and things like that. But there's other times when you get into that courtroom. I love the adrenaline rush that I get from going into court, or having to think on my feet, and outsmarting the other side. And like I said at the beginning, getting inside the head of the other side to try to think, okay, what's their next move going to be? There's something really stimulating about getting to do that and get paid for doing that for a living. That I just feel like I'm super blessed for getting to do it.
That's awesome. I hope everybody feels that way about their jobs or careers rather. That's great. So what are you looking forward to the most in your practice? Like, where do you see yourself in 5 to 10 years?
Yeah, the firm continues to grow.
Great.
We've got people that we're actually hiring for another associate right now.
That's great.
So, long term, it's obviously leaving an impact with people that we serve. That's obviously a longer term thing that I'm looking forward to. But I like the people who mentored me. I've got a couple different lawyers that I've been a mentor to, where they have me on speed dial now.
Yeah.
And I'm happy to give them a forum, or talk them off a cliff, or whatever it might be that somebody did for me. And so there's a part of my practice where I feel like that's how I can give back, is pay forward the things that people helped me back when I got started. And so, continuing to do that. And even as my firm grows, at some point, I don't know that I'll ever retire in the sense that even if I step back from being active all the time at the level that I am today, if the firm continued to grow on the growth path that it's on, and I were just to have an emeritus role at some point in the future, where part of my job is just to be a resource to other attorneys working in the firm, giving advice, giving a different, being a sounding board for a different perspective for some creative strategy, that would be the ideal job.
Wow, that's amazing.
Keep your mind sharp and all that.
Sounds like you've really thought about it. That's amazing.
I have.
Do you have any other advice for the Lawyer Stories community that you'd like to share? I know you've given us some good advice in the episode.
Yeah, just be true to yourself, whatever that is. if anything is taken, it takes you a while to find that voice, because a lot of people tell you what you're supposed to be. There's lots of role models of this attorney, you need to be like this, or you need to be like that. And the reality is everybody has a different skill set, a different voice.
That's right.
There's no right type of lawyer. You just need to be the kind of lawyer that you can get up every morning, look yourself in the eye in the mirror and say, hey, I'm doing what I'm supposed to be doing. This is sort of my mission in life. And I'm not like everybody else. And that's okay.
Oh, that's great. Have we covered everything you've wanted to today? Is there anything else you'd like to
I don't know. The reality is people's lives are really complicated, and not necessarily in bad ways, but they have lots of little threads and lots of interesting things that make them their life story interesting. I'm sure the same thing could be said for me, but I think we'd have to go through a bottle or two of that scotch you like to put on your Instagram before we
here and there. Okay, bottle or two. That's not bad. I'd love to do that if you want to.
Yeah. Well, when I come out to Boston, I'll definitely come visit and
awesome.
definitely do that. But I just would say that find your own voice. That would be find your own voice, and when you find it, then just go with it.
I love that, and focus on your positives, like what you can, you can do.
Right.
I think that's huge. So that's great. So do we miss? I want to just know if we missed anything. If you want to discuss anything else while we're on the episode.
I don't know.
Okay.
I had some friends come back, visited me over the summer from Boston. Somebody I had not seen since law school, actually. That's how long it's been. And she and her husband came to visit, and I showed them Woodinville wine country, because I live in the middle of Washington's wine country on the west side.
Oh, that's awesome. Yeah.
And I got a lot of Boston Red Sox stuff.
Okay.
So
okay, you did. Well, for me, and we could cut this off soon because nobody wants to hear about what I have to say. But I'm more I'm actually New York baseball, and that's the story behind that. But I'm big Patriots, big Celtics fan. So
right. Well, I kind of threw that in there because I've seen a few of your posts over time, and I thought that might be a fun little topic just to toss in there like a little hand grenade.
That's funny. Well, we really appreciate you being a big supporter of Lawyer Stories, and we'd be happy to put up any blogs that you have, on our website. We'd love to do it, and definitely we'll be in touch, and we'll do everything we can to work together.
Yeah.
So thanks again. Stay right there. Lawyer Stories community, wherever you are in the world today, enjoy yourself.